Hello, this is Property Matters, a weekly catch-up on all matters property, supported by Fairview International Property Consultancy and auctionproperty.co.uk. We're live every Sunday, 10 a.m, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and our website, propertymatterstv.co.uk. If you're watching on the website, we'd love you to leave us a Google review, of course, on the home button page there. And also, if you'd like to get in touch, of course, you can get in touch via our email, which is hello@propertymatterstv.co.uk. Property Matters is also available as a podcast. That's every Monday at 10 a.m, 24 hours after the live show. And we're also on Dilsey Radio as well. Let's welcome our property expert, Joe Joshi. Hi, Joe.
Yes, good morning. Good morning all to our listeners and to our viewers. Dilsey Radio also now has a weekly show for Property Matters. So you can tune in there as well as, of course, here and on our website.
As if this wasn't enough. Right, let's get into our first story this week. And this is something interesting I found. And I didn't realise that the government had done a consultative white paper in 2021 on their strategy for heating homes, particularly in rural areas. And of course, you forget about that in the rural areas, there's a lot of very old properties that are not built to current day standards that, of course, have still got oil and gas heating in. So there's some confusion apparently at the moment because of this new policy set in 2021, exactly when it's come into force and what prospective buyers of those kind of properties going to have to do to them. So the Trade Association for Off-Grid Heating Technicians, he even knew there was a thing called that. It's called Offtech, and they've been receiving inquiries in recent weeks from estate agents and house sellers asking for advice on the government's proposals to transition rural properties on fossil fuel heating systems onto renewable technologies, and whether this will, of course, put off potential house buyers. Offtech says that there is an estimated 4 million properties across the UK who are not connected to the mains gas grid and use alternative fuels such as oil heating, LPG or electric storage heaters. And the proposals from the government in 2021 were supposed to be about phasing out the fossil fuel heating systems in homes from 2026. In most cases, these properties will be expected to install a heat pump when their existing boiler stops working. And the announcement was part of the UK's ambition to achieve net zero by 2050. So as it stands at the moment, once that boiler conks out, then you've got to put in an alternative solution. Of course, those heat pumps and the work that required for them is an expensive job. Joe?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, this is probably something that's not been focused on purely because it is rural and one doesn't sort of bring that into the mind's eye about when you're looking at sort of, towns and other areas, and where we are fortunate to have access to gas, electric through mains services and mains drainage and so forth. The rural properties are, of course, almost on their own in many shapes and forms, including the fact that they may have cesspit for instead of mains drainage. They may have obviously oil heating, and that is a huge issue. When you look at what they're thinking about doing, I mean, the expense is just extraordinary, because you could imagine that if the nearest point for gas or for the mains drainage is the nearest main road, and you've got a house that is about 1.5 acres or 2 acres away from that site, you've literally got a plan to dig. And of course, the services, the utilities providers' view is that they can allow you to link in, but it's up to you to make the actual connection from your property right all the way down towards the road. And that is a very costly exercise, let alone think about perhaps fossil fuels going and some sort of net zero types of operations coming in. So it is going to be quite challenging. I think it's not been focused on, to be honest with you, because there are so few by comparison. 4 million in the grand scheme is probably not a lot, but the expense of getting them online into the normal situation, what we call normal, in terms of mains drainage, etc., is an extremely expensive and challenging one.
Yeah, because some of these houses are going to be listed buildings, of course, and as I was saying, they're not built to traditional standards of today, and of course, one of those heat pumps isn't necessarily going to be the right choice for that kind of property, because we've heard from other people, haven't we, that they don't instantly heat up like a radiator does, for example, in a modern heating system. They keep a sort of latent temperature and gradually build it, don't they?
Well, yeah, I mean the heat pump, and not only that, is the amount of energy that these things can create. You know, what can they do? I mean, some of these properties, the rural properties, are farming properties, and they've got to look at livestock and the heating and all the facilities, the water, and everything else that is required to keep livestock in the situation that it has to be. And so I think it's a far cry. I mean, ironically enough, was talking to somebody yesterday who is, had a water pump put into their garden, and now is talking about what do they call it, solar energy, and of course heat pump, and then trying to get their heat from the earth. All sorts of people are looking at all sorts of things, but they're not cheap. In fact, we were even talking about putting a windmill back in the ground, because obviously that could probably do other things. Like back in the old days, get the horse steering the windmill going around. It really is quite ironic that we're having to even think about some of these older ways to just generate the power and the electricity, and of course the waterworks and mains drainage that is required to live in modern standards. But I think it's going to be a long time before that actually comes through, because I don't think they've actually really thought it through. It's just something that they've been toying in the background, saying, oh well, these people should have energy efficiency situations in rural location. But there are people, like you say, there are properties that are listed. Not only are they listed, but they are probably owned by some very elderly people who have got no view of making those changes. It's the new people that are buying them that may be thinking, okay, well, what do I do here? How do I actually make this efficient, and what's the cost? And that, of course, will be relative to the value of the property.
Yes, because they're unlikely to be particularly energy efficient. I mean, if they had an old coal fire, an open coal fire, for example, in the past, then it's unlikely to have cavity wall insulation, that kind of thing. But they're stressing the fact that actually these are only proposals at the moment, and they're in the consultation stage, and they're saying that basically with the general election next year, the date of 2026 is looking particularly optimistic to have this in law of any description. So they don't think it's coming anytime soon. But I just thought it was an interesting subject to talk about, because they were saying that there's no suggestions that, for example, that if you're a fossil fuel heating system in your country property, such as oil, for example, or something like that, or coal, then there's no suggestion that you're going to have to take it out by 2026 or something, or replace your existing working boiler. Proposals only focus on the installation of new heating systems when the existing one breaks down. This means after 2026 you continue to use an existing oil boiler. I suppose one thing you could do, Joe, is you could replace your system with another oil boiler now, and then of course that could give you 20 years.
Absolutely. I mean, that is a very valid point and a good point, and maybe one that should be advised out rapidly by agents to their existing owners, and say to them, look, you may as well upgrade your system now, even as it exists, so that you don't have to actually think about that when you do come to sell it, and because it'll be there for another 20, 25 years, way after you have gone. But the other thing is, when you look at these EPCs nowadays, I mean, none of these old houses are going to pass. It's just never going to happen. I mean, you try and get a grade 2 listed or a grade 1 listed property with the old sash windows and all sorts of other things that are going on to get some sort of heating control. It's just, not a thing that's going to happen in a hurry. And also to comply with English Heritage and obviously the listed building people, you've got to find almost handmade windows that then become, efficient. So there's a lot of things to be done. I don't think they've actually, like you say, it's a consultancy. It's a consultancy at the moment, but it's good to bring it to our viewers and listeners and put it in their minds that it's another thing that's coming down the road.
What's interesting is that this trade association, Offtech, says that there are alternative solutions being put forward. Around 150 oil-heated properties across the UK have successfully transitioned to renewable liquid fuel called, get this, hydro-treated vegetable oil, or HVO as it's known, as part of an industry demonstration project. The fuel reduces emissions by 88% and works in the existing boiler and tank, following a minor low-cost modification to the boiler. There's an increasing support from rural MPs for this solution, who are seeking to secure an amendment to the government's energy bill. Have you heard of HVO?
Not heard of HVO, but I've heard of the vegetable oil aspect of it, which people have sort of toyed and thrown the idea about. But again, how efficient is it going to be? And of course, it is noted that sometimes it's only a tweak of the boiler in some cases. But it's a bit like saying, I've got a petrol car and I'm actually going to convert the engine now to diesel or to something else. I'm sure it's not as easy as it sounds. And it'll probably there'll be a complication because it's never, just simple. And that's what the costs are going to be going on. But yes, I've heard of, vegetable oil concepts. In the areas that I work and live in, sometimes I've come across properties that are, still oil fired, and they are difficult. And oil boilers are very difficult. You've got to find specific engineers that actually understand oil boilers in order to be able to maintain them and service them, because they're not all trained to deal with, the gas or the oil, or the oil people. The gas people are not always trained to deal with the oil ones, and vice versa. So yeah, all of those things must be taken into consideration.
There's a new ONS survey that reveals that 2 in 3 adults, 65%, are cutting back on their spending in response to the cost of living crisis. I'm surprised it's not higher, actually. With the recent 0.5% interest rate rise, of course, mortgages are getting more expensive. House buyers are increasingly looking at the potential additional costs once they move into a property. So, and I'm sure you mentioned this a moment ago, you had somebody talking about it yesterday, but people are now looking, well, okay, if I have to put up all this extra money on the mortgage, I've got to make sure that the running costs are low.
Yes, I mean it's just not the mortgage aspect of it. It's actually in the value. They are having to take into consideration all of the costs of perhaps upgrading a property that they may be purchasing, in order to sort of meet all the future carbon emissions that everybody seems to have promised to deliver. So it's a combination of both value, i.e. negotiating a better price, or having the add-on on mortgage. Either way, it's an expense that has to be considered now, an extra expense that has to be considered now in part of the moving process.
It's not a good time for UK net zero ambitions when we're in the middle of a cost of living crisis, is it, Joe? I mean, all this extra cost to try and bring things up to scratch for net zero by 2050, and yet people say, well, I'm struggling to live as I am now.
Yeah, it's just not going to happen. I think there's so many things that they would love to have. I mean, if it was one thing, and let's say, like I said to you before, if it was just the interest rate and then other things that we need to maintain to the house to bring it in, fine. But it's been a whole barrage. We've just been absolutely bombarded in every possible way that you can think about at this moment in time. And considering we've had a low interest rate that everybody got used to, now all of a sudden the interest rate is much higher, the utilities are higher, and now we're talking about here where boilers and things have got to be changed by a certain period, which they're just not going to happen. Even though it's a consultancy, it won't happen in the period that we want it to be. EPC's got to be meeting a new criteria. It just goes on. The list is just going on and on and on and on. And I don't think it really matters whether you're pink, purple, or yellow, or blue, or red. It is what it is in the world crisis, and some of those have been created. I suppose, I'm obviously always sympathetic to, situations all over the world. But, at the moment, we need to keep our house in order instead of looking over the garden fence and continue to support other nations when actually our own nation is suffering quite a lot.
It's interesting, isn't it, to think that to hit these zero targets, that means that every property pretty much in the UK, including all those on mains gas, are going to have to transition to a greener heating system in the future. I mean, it's a mammoth task, isn't it?
It's a huge task, and it's not a task that's going to come easy. And on top of that, we haven't got all the qualified people that can actually bring it up to that level in such a short space of time. I mean, to find trade that are qualified to do these things alone is a challenge. I have recently spoken to a client who is, purchasing a business where they are now looking to create a training center for the trades because they just don't find, the gas and the electric and the plumbers and maybe oil-fired boilers, etc. people available, readily available from the time it used to be. The next generation are not ready and trained to deal with those. So there's a huge shortage in just labor supply. There's just this technical supply.
Yes, in fact, we've got a development on our street here that has been going on for quite a long time, quite a substantial redevelopment that's going here. And they have been telling me that they've found it very difficult to get tradespeople who will, because it's not just a heating system, it then comes with this sort of supercomputer that's on the wall that manages it all for you. So they're happy to put in the pipe work and so on, but then they have to go to an electrician or someone like that to get that to be fitted, that part of it fitted. But of course, the electricians aren't particularly learning that because they're not putting in the pipes. So it does seem that we have to have some retraining for those that focus on specific things where the technology is now taking over. I mean, who would have thought years ago we'd have ended up with a proper decent computer in our car, but now we've got this huge computer that monitors everything in our car, whereas before it was completely, petrol and mechanics.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is just dramatic changes, and every home now is coming almost with a cupboard of comms, communications, as it's called. This is the comms cupboard, which tells you about the underfloor heating. It tells you about the air conditioning that may be gone in. It tells you about all the lighting and it just goes on. It's just a minefield. What's scary in my mind is that everything wants to go electric. And if you don't have sufficient electric, what do? It just shuts down. I mean, I laugh about this, but at the same time, those that have got gates on their houses, for example, as you drive out, the electric goes out, you can't get out of the house because the gate's just gone off and so forth. So, it made you sort of smile and think, oh my God, we're relying so much on electricity in whatever form it's coming that I don't think that, the world seems to be going towards electric. We were told many years back, got to come out of petrol cars because diesel's the way. Then we all went towards diesel. And now they're saying diesel's not the way, let's go electric. So it's like a fad. It's just like, we just sheep keep following each other and doing the same thing. But I think you've got to buck the idea and say that there are other things, or stay where you are, because at the end of the day, what can anybody really do? You might get a fine, but a fine might be actually worth paying by comparison to the cost of actually doing the whole work in the first place.
Moving on to our second story, something we're revisiting because we talked about EPC certification and the fact that we have to have a rating of C or higher for landlords in particular by 2028 on properties. And we're seeing a greater proportion of properties, according to new research, Joe, entering the rental market that were previously for sale, and they have an EPC rating of C or higher. So basically what's happening is the latest government plan suggests that all rental properties should at least have an EPC C rating by 2028. The proportion of property entering the rental market with an EPC graded of A to C that were previously for sale has increased by 16% since 2019, while the proportion of rental homes entering the market with a D to G rating has dropped by 11%. These findings are supported by a new survey amongst landlords where more property investors said they were avoiding lower EPC rated homes. Almost two-thirds, 61% of landlords surveyed by Rightmove said they would not buy a property below C, up from 47% last year, while a third of landlords who own EPC lower-rated properties plan to sell them rather than make the improvements to the EPC rating, compared with 20% who plan to sell rather than improve last year. So basically, landlords are reviewing their portfolios, and rather than spending the money on doing them up, they're selling them on and buying something where someone's already done the work.
Yes, and that's no surprise to a large extent, because there are so many things that you've got to actually take into consideration. First of all, the older landlords that have had properties that they've had in their portfolio, let's say for the last, I don't know, 25, 30, 40 years, now probably need upgrading to come and meet the new standard of a minimum of EPC C. Are probably got equity in there probably in their property, so are just happy to sell. The other thing that may be is the lease may be actually lower, and the cost of renewing that lease is going to be far more, including the EPC. So that's part of the reason there's a lot of buy to let or properties of investment that are coming to the market being sold, and that then becomes a problem with the new owner who may be a cash purchaser, but then will go into that knowing that they bought it at the right money now and spend the money to actually recoup the money over the next years themselves. There is a bit of going on, and yes, and the ones that are selling are obviously then looking to reinvest, but now that they know what the problem is, that it has to be a minimum of EPC C, then of course they're going to look at properties that are available for and with that EPC or that rating, so that they don't have to invest in it much more going forward and can just live off the rental value.
The survey also looked at why landlords are leaving the sector, and the interesting, there's no surprise in the results that come out of that questioning, but interesting to see the proportion. So the number one reason why landlords are leaving the buy-to-let sector, 47% say it's because they've got concerns over the government's general sentiment towards landlords, which is an interesting one. Rising taxation was 41%. That's the second reason they're going. Increased compliance requirements, 33%, and the rising cost of buy-to-let mortgages, 25%. You kind of would have thought it might have been the other way around, but it's interesting to see that a lot of landlords think, well, do you know what, government doesn't want me to do it, I'll go and find some other way of making some money.
Well, the government is really quite foolhardy in this whole situation, because, whilst they are putting all this pressure on landlords, what they're also not understanding is that so many properties are coming out of the private rental sector altogether. And they then have to find themselves the properties to provide for the homeless people that are becoming homeless quite rapidly at this moment in time. Number of reasons, of course, the cost of living is so expensive, so sometimes they can't afford to carry on renting the property, so they have to go to the council and say, look, I just can't do this, you're going to have to find me a home that is more acceptable. And sometimes it's about lenders who have pulled the plug and said, we've got to sell this property because you can't afford to pay the mortgage is too high. And so I don't think the government actually has this right at all. I think they need to support the buy-to-let market. They need to support the landlords in order to make sure that they provide. Now, what happens is that you get a small percentage, 1 or 2 out of 100 will be bad landlords, and unfortunately, everybody then gets tarred with that same brush. Somebody that is renting a house that's full of damp, so that means everybody must be renting a house that's full of damp. No, there are a lot of people that are very happy and comfortable and have a long-term relationship with their landlord. Some would go back 10 years maybe or more, and we're quite comfortable where they are. But then there's that 1 or 2 guys who come along and go, right, I'm gonna do 10 people in one room and it's full of damp and so forth. So that's the one that hits the media, and that's what the government look at, and that's people that go look at it and go, oh, look what's happening here. We better do this to everybody because that's the right way to do it. And it's not, because these people are now coming out of the market in absolute hordes. I mean, they just literally, coming out as quickly as they can because it just becomes too expensive. Not just interest rates and works that needs doing, but their taxations are so much that it doesn't leave them any money in the game. So why would you be in a business? Why would you be in a game that's not going to give you any return? So yes, of course, they are now looking at alternatives. The problem is, what are the alternatives? There are not any particularly great alternatives other than stash your money into a building society, because they're the only ones that are now paying a half-decent interest rate. So it's probably just easy to just park there and take a cruise.
It's interesting that there's a cut-off point for landlords, and there's research suggests it's around 5 or more properties. So landlords who have more than 5 properties, 5 or more, plan to increase their portfolio over the next 12 months. Compared to landlords who only own 1 property, only 10% of those were thinking about increasing their portfolio by adding another property. Landlords with bigger properties are also more likely to make improvements to their properties from below a C to 2025, before 2025, and be more willing to invest in the property with an EPC rating lower than C. So what they're saying is that up and coming changes to the EPC legislation is the growing concern for landlords. However, the data suggests that many are getting ahead and focusing their investment in properties that will meet the new minimum standard and bring these to the rental market. So those with 5 or more are buying up the distressed sales of those who've got small portfolios, and they're doing them up and putting them back on the market. So I suppose it's down to those bigger companies to do this investment that the government's been so keen for the rental market to do.
Yes, I mean, what we call is accidental landlords. So the ones that are below 5 letting properties are accidental landlords. They are people that either had the money and thought, well, actually, I'm not getting a good return on my money sitting in the building society or the bank, so I may as well go and buy a property. They buy 1, 2, possibly 3, up to 5. Those are 1, 2, or 3 are now are just not worth their while. They bought them. The cost of having it maintained, trying to get it up to EPC C standard, and of course the buy-to-let money that is now costing, the borrowing is costing. They're the ones that are coming out. But there's a lot of them. It's not as if like this. It's just not. There's millions of properties that are bought by what we call accidental landlords. So when people have had windfalls or had a bereavement, and they've actually inherited property, or they come out of a pension, or they've got a pension that is end of year end of employment pension schemes, etc. All of those things are means that people are turning around and say, well, actually, that's not giving me an income. That's not giving me what I need. So they became what we call accidental landlords. They were the ones that the 1 or 2 or 3 property they bought, which is the ones I was always saying in our time, that they're the ones that probably shouldn't have been, and that therefore the market in itself for the first time buyers would have been more comfortable. It wouldn't have had an increase in value to the levels that they did, like 22% over the last 2-3 years, primarily because it would have been just ordinary buyers buying it, and they should have been given another alternative, like some sort of investment vehicle, which gave them good return on their investment. They wouldn't have bothered to come into the property market. They wouldn't have become the accidental landlords. But now, in the current circumstances, those accidental landlords are now the ones that are paying the price, and so are the government, because all these people want to dump these properties because it's just not tax efficient. It's just not efficiency as an efficient investment in the current climate.
Final story this week, Martin Lewis is in the news saying that homeowners should avoid a dangerous mortgage error. He's been explaining the value of fixing longer. He's saying that in the market at the moment, the longer term fixes are the better value. But this whole notion that I'll hang on a little while because mortgage rates will get back down to normal very soon. But of course, he's making the point that mortgage rates have not been normal for almost 15 years. And if you think the sort of typical 35-year-old who's going into the mortgage market now to buy a first property particularly, the last 15 years, since they were in their 20s when they probably weren't looking at the market, they've only known very low, historically low rates. And if you look at it in historical context, which I've managed to do, I found online, here's the 2-year fixed rate mortgages in blue, and we've got a graph here. 10-year is the maroon colour, black is the 3-year fix, 2-year variable is a green, and 5-year fix is the grey. But what you can see, doesn't really matter which one's which, but back in 2000 we were looking at rates of 7%, Joe, and then of course they've gone right the way down to just over 1% in sort of 2021, the lowest point there, and now of course climbing back up to where sort of where they were at one time. So if you drew a mean line through that graph there, you're looking at just under 4%, I reckon. So that's we're not far off what is normal for the last 15 years. But he's saying, oh, you mustn't possibly sit there and look at them. Well, I'll wait till rates get back to more normal levels of sort of 1%. I don't think we're going to go back to that, are we?
No, and I think Martin Lewis is absolutely right. It's good advice, good guidance, and I would only endorse that because, as far as I'm concerned, I've always thought that the average rate should be about 5%, which I think I've mentioned a million and one times on our shows and so forth. I always thought that's where it would settle. It is now settling at 5.5, probably going to be 6, probably going to be 7% by the time we finish. So it's going to be back to the 2007 range before you know it. So if the opportunity exists, and this is where Bob Singh probably would come in, take your fixed rates for as long as you can. 5-year fixed are probably the right way to go at the moment if they continue to do what they are. I mean, it is highly likely that we could be at 8-9% before we know it. So if you can get something fixed at 6.5% now, you'd be certainly advised to take that opportunity on. I don't think they'll reverse. If they ever reverse, they'll reverse to something like around 4.5%, which is your average line that you wanted to take across there, which is where it's going to be. It's the same as people said to me over the years, I'm waiting for the house prices to drop before I buy. But what they forget, there's all sorts of other things that have gone up in the meantime. So the house prices, even though there might be a 5%, 6%, let's say even a 10% correction in the current market, what they don't take into consideration that it actually went up by 20-25% over the last 2-3 years. So you're not actually gaining a great deal, but you might feel good, might have a feel good factor to say, well, actually I bought it on the downturn. So it is currently a buyer's market. There's no doubt about that. But the question is, how much of a buyer's market is it by comparison to maybe 2 years ago when it was 20-25% up? So I suppose the answer to the question is the same as Martin Lewis's, and that is, take your steps now, whatever they are, because you'll go forward and you'll find that maybe if you don't take a fixed rate over the next 5 years, you might find that price is actually way above what you might fix it now. It's the same as a house price. If you don't buy them, when you're ready to buy, then you'll find that, you might be actually paying even more when you do actually have the money to put the deposit, or you can't get the money from your parents, or you can't find the resources and the sources for putting the deposit down or getting the mortgage. You might find that the house prices have shot up beyond that level anyway. So, it is what we live by in the UK. Housing market is prime in all our discussions. And I think, where possible, when you can, try and do it as soon as you can.
He says right now a 5-year mortgage fix is cheaper than a 2-year, and a 10-year mortgage fix is cheaper than a 5-year mortgage. So suggestion is that they think that rates in the short term will come down, but it's a question, I suppose, of by how much. But anyway, we shall wait and see. And I think that's all we've got time for this week. So, Joe, thank you as always for your wisdom and your words. I will see you again for another Property Matters this time next week.